and welcome. I'm Barkha Dutt. It's 9 p.m. and the big story today, India and China have started the process of disengagement in the highest reaches of the Himalayas. Pictures have been released by army sources that show the beginning of this process of disengagement, and the Defence Minister Rajnath Singh has informed Parliament about this process. The move has not come, or rather the announcement has not come without its share of skepticism. The opposition in particular is demanding more details and demanding to know whether in some ways the line of actual control has been shifted, because reports suggest that there will be certain areas, particularly along the Pangong Lake, that will no longer be patrolled. But we have on the program today a panel of experts to explain to us exactly what this disengagement looks like, whether India should buy into it or whether India must tread with caution. Let me introduce our panel this evening. We're joined on the program by former Army Chief General VP Malik. We're also joined by General Hasnain, who's of course been a former GOC of the 15th Corps, and Ambassador KC Singh, veteran diplomat, is with us as well. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much. A pleasure having you all with us. General Malik, what do you make of what we're hearing, both from the Defence Minister and also the questions that have been raised about whether pulling back from certain areas in terms of patrolling is a dangerous thing to do, and it's a kind of de facto shifting of what both countries have always agreed the line of actual control to be? General Malik.
Barkha, first let me say that the talks which have been going on at political, diplomatic as well as military level for so long, I'm glad that there has been some breakthrough in that, and it has resulted in some positive steps, because many people were skeptical. They were wondering whether they are going to lead to something or not. So that is the good point. The second is that the people have agreed on mutual and reciprocal disengagement, which is also a good point. So there is a thaw. There is the sensible, I would call it sensible initial step in rebuilding of trust. But having said that it is a good step to go ahead with, I must also indicate some caution or some necessary warning, whatever you may like to call it, because we all know that Chinese never can be trusted as far as their agreements are concerned. Yeah. And whatever, even written agreements, they have flouted so many times. And we know the kind of attitude that they have adopted towards India, hostility all round, frankly. Having said that, so we have to be very careful, we have to be cautious, and every step has to be carefully taken, whether it comes to alertness, whether it comes to keeping a hawk eye on the monitoring part, the verification part, all that. And also I must say that, look, this is a beginning. We have a long process of disengagement, de-escalation, and then we can hope to go back to the status quo situation of April 2000 to 2020. But all that, in my view, and I have been repeating it again and again, will still remain a dangerous situation unless we are able to delineate the LAC. Whatever is agreed to, whatever is accepted by the Chinese, and whatever is accepted by us, as long as it is not marked on the map, situation will still remain very sensitive, and it can always go back. So that, I believe, is a must, absolutely, when we continue with our political talks with the Chinese.
Fair enough. But General Hasnain, there have been some references to what's happening in Ladakh as the new Siachen. And what has been suggested by that is a sort of permanent militarization of eastern Ladakh, of the high Himalayas, that after what happened in Siachen, after what happened in Kargil, General Malik will know that better than anyone else, having led our troops in that war, these are the Chinese, probably even more insidious than the Pakistanis, and therefore that sense that you can pull back the military buildup based on this de-escalation cannot happen anytime soon.
Well, to start with, Barkha, firstly, General Malik has covered it so well, summed up the whole situation so well. But as to your specific question, one can't differ with what you're saying. It is a very, very sensitive area, and just like Siachen, just like Kargil, and once you have built up into this area in this manner, and the manner in which the Chinese have shown their hand in the last 9 or 10 months. Obviously, they mean business. Whether we can trust them now to actually withdraw, to actually de-escalate and disengage, only time will tell us. But it's a fact that it would have been a very, very expensive exercise for both India and China to continue maintaining 50,000 troops, and that would not have been an end. Probably you would have gone up to 75 or 100,000 troops here, and this would have carried on forever. So it's a good thing to a great extent that the government reposed confidence in the military leadership in undertaking the 9 rounds of theatre level talks, which is the first time it's ever happened like that. Of course, joined subsequently by diplomats, eminent diplomats from the MEA. It has resulted in something. I will not be try and put it down in any way. I would say yes, let's take it from here, because the only thing that we have to be very, very careful about, what General Malik just mentioned, is the trust factor, and the verification in that is going to be the most important thing. Because I must remind you, the last time it happened on the 5th of June, we also similarly agreed to a de-escalation and a disengagement. What happened 10 days later in Galwan? 15th and 16th of June, this is exactly what happened at that time. We can't have a repeat of Galwan. The nation just can't afford to do that again. So the pressure is on the military leadership, that having accepted this kind of a thing, they'll have to make sure that the ISR capability they have, which they have to utilize for verification, has to be very, very strong. And I don't foresee, and what a lot of people are perceiving, that the tanks are pulling back and the ICVs are pulling back. These are good dramatics at the beginning of the whole thing. Let's
bring up those pictures. So basically what you're saying is that those tanks aren't all pulling back. There's some pictures that have been released by the military, but the tanks aren't all pulling back.
Any military prudence dictates that you have to hold back something. The real problem starts when the depth infantry elements will start withdrawing, and you find that the forward elements are devoid of any reserves. That is the time when you start actually wondering what to really do.
Yeah, Ambassador KC Singh, how do you see the announcement by the Defence Minister and some of the questions that have been raised about, the fact that areas around Finger 4 will no longer be patrolled? I'm talking, of course, of the Pangong Lake. But let's also remind our audience that, to having brought India and China to the dialogue table was in part because of sort of military pushback as well. That's what enabled it. But now where we stand today, how do you read it?
3 or 4 points. Now, coming to Defence Minister's statement, it had mostly history, it had generalities, and then he excused himself by saying this is sensitive and operational information. I can't give you more details. It's understandably he doesn't want to put all the details on the table at this stage. But that seems to imply that the details are certainly not returned to the de facto position pre-April last year. If that was a thing, this government would be jumping from rooftops and declaring that we've pushed Chinese back and we've restored status ex post facto. That is not the situation. And that was not likely to happen. So what does it mean? At the strategic level, why did the Chinese come in the middle of a pandemic? They were trying to, put India in its place. They had been objecting about Article 370. They were concerned about India aligning too closely in the Quad with Australia, Japan, US. And they came just before the US election, and they kept the pressure up. And I must say the military, though taken by surprise, were able to equalize the pressure, albeit having had to start from further back because the Chinese had intruded. But they did see some initiative by getting the Kailash heights. Now that is where the situation stood. So why are the Chinese now unbending at this stage? One, they waited for Biden to take over. They've realized that Biden is going to continue with Trump's policy. He has said that. Biden has also said we need very urgently a meeting of the Quad. And if you look at the Chinese behavior, they've been putting military pressure at the Senkaku Islands against Japan continuously. They've had a trade war with Australia, and they've started this military action with India. So they were testing the 3 members of the Quad, and therefore, in a sense, saying, let's see what US can do about it. Now, therefore, at this moment, they probably don't want to push India beyond a certain stage because their basic objectives have been fulfilled. They've come up to what some people are saying is the 1959 line. Now, if they go back and they create a buffer zone They are forcing you to create a buffer zone if that is what is happening in what you were in the area that you were de facto controlling. Now, therefore, the devil will lie in the detail. We give up the Kailash heights. We have the Chinese go back to, they say, finger 8. Do they retain their fortifications on finger 4? Do they forbid you to patrol up to certainly beyond finger 4? Do they retain their depth in Depsang Plains and refuse to go back and therefore threaten your highway going up to the Karakoram Pass? Now, all those details will emerge, and no government can keep them hidden because their satellites, pictures will come, details will come. But essentially, I think the Chinese have fulfilled their primary purpose. And therefore, at this stage, they've seen that India has recovered very quickly from the pandemic. India didn't sue for peace. Indian economy is recovering. And the Americans are back on the war path, even with Biden. And therefore, they said, let's de-escalate here. And let's now see what is the post-pandemic, post-Biden world.
Are you concerned, Ambassador KC Singh, about these reports that, what you mentioned about the pullback in patrolling? Does that concern you? And I want to ask General Malik the same question. You've had the opposition today targeting the government on this. Is that a credible targeting in your opinion?
Look, we've had, and that's where General VP Singh comes in. Now, everybody thought, he had just flown over the cuckoo's nest. But I think it was part of the choreography of the government. He deliberately muddied the water about line of actual control being crossed by both sides. And then the Chinese picked on it and said, look, we haven't done it. So it kind of muddied the whole issue of where the LAC lies. And there are competing interpretations of the LAC, and you've got 2 military experts, including a former army chief, who know it better. Now, the question is, there would be some adjustment at some stage. But is that adjustment finally accepted by the Chinese? Then it may be worthwhile ceding some area. Or is that still going to be used by the Chinese to keep putting pressure on India and therefore leave the border unsettled? That we'll have to see. Are we getting any benefit out of ceding some of the patrolling areas, or we are not?
General Malik, can you come in on that? You've surely been following this controversy. You've had Rahul Gandhi also target the government, but I actually don't want to bring politics into this. I want to just ask you as a military man, the fact is that patrolling has also always been a matter of negotiations, but I think Ambassador KC Singh asked the more important question than the one about patrolling. What has happened to Chinese fortifications? So I think we could still live with some agreement on which spaces would be patrolled and which would not be patrolled if the fortifications have been withdrawn, and we just do not have that level of detail right now. General Malik.
Barkha, I think the Defence Minister did say that any fortification that came up after April or after May 2020, they will be removed. I think that's part of the statement, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
One part. The second thing is, as far as the patrolling in the areas between their perception of LAC and our perception of LAC. Now, this is, in my view, it is going back to a situation of 1980s. This is what the situation used to be in 1980s. And then gradually, when we started encroaching and started patrolling in those areas between the two perception lines, then the problem started, occurring. This is what happened in Northeast earlier. So at the moment, they are saying that there will be no patrolling in those areas. Incidentally, when we had some patrolling, and that is where even in north of Pangong, so there had been some clashes, hand-to-hand clashes that had taken place, I think in the month of May or June in that area. So not having patrol there is I think is a good step. Both, if they agree, then at least there will be no further escalation in the situation. And subsequently, but what I am again and again saying is that unless those perceptions are marked on the map, and we then have an agreement that, okay, we will not go to that line and they will not come to this line, only then we can have some more peace and tranquility along the LAC. Otherwise, LAC will always remain sensitive, and patrolling is something which cannot be stopped, frankly. I mean, I have seen it in the 70s and 80s, and I have also seen it now after retirement, whatever has been going on in whether it is Eastern Ladakh or even in Northeast. So this cannot be a permanent step that there will be no patrolling. But for the time being, to be able to move ahead, I think it's a good step that at the moment there should be no patrolling so that there are no chances of hand-to-hand clashes.
But let me understand that. If you're saying that there's an inevitability to return to the patrolling positions, then won't we be back to square one? Then this seems like a temporary truce as opposed to a de-escalation.
Yeah, it is a temporary truce. At the moment we are talking of disengagement. We are not talking of de-escalation. Frankly speaking, in my view, de-escalation will take place when all the additional troops that have been inducted in that area, they are withdrawn from there. We're talking of 50,000 troops in that area, which we have now got in those areas. And they have also got 2 divisions worth. So that will be de-escalation. So in my view, the steps can be first disengagement. Second is de-escalation. And then only we can hope to have some kind of peace and tranquility if all these steps are taken in the positive manner, in the spirit in which we are all talking of at the moment between the 2 political parties from India and China.
But I'm very interested by the fact that both the military officers, General Malik and then General Hasnain, agreeing with you that this cannot be called de-escalation at the moment. We have to be clear in the nomenclature we use. General Hasnain, go ahead. You were nodding in agreement.
Absolutely. I'm absolutely in agreement with what General Malik said. You see, a lot of people are perceiving that this is conflict resolution. We are nowhere near conflict resolution. This is the trigger, the first point of it is starting, disengagement, which will lead to this de-escalation if the verification process goes on, everything is hunky-dory, and the meetings continue at the strategic level, as the theater level talks continue. This is what General Malik says, this is a very, very temporary situation. It can all go back to square one in a moment. As I said, something like Galwan happening or any kind of a awkward event taking place, everything can go back to square one. So I would say we have to take, these are baby steps that we have to treat very carefully. And as far as patrolling is concerned, what General Malik says, I go along completely. You see, one of the reasons why we want to limit patrolling, stop patrolling for the moment, is to prevent the possibility of any clashes taking place. Subsequently, as you gain a little more confidence, and that you have these talks at the moment at the strategic level, at the theater level, you come down to the field level, perhaps at the tactical level, you will have more confidence building measures taking place. Then that patrolling can restart. It's a long drawn out process. It's a long way ahead that we are looking. We should not give this idea to people in the nation that as if this problem is already behind us.
That's a very, I would say, a sober point. And Ambassador Singh, I think when we hear General Malik and General Hasnain, you really realize that this is not curtains down on this conflict. And you are neither going to see all the tanks pulling back, nor all the troops pulling back. You're even going to return to patrolling. Eventually, this is a pause. The best way to describe this is it's a pause. But there has been, there will be pressure about status quo ante. Now, given that the LSE is not actually on paper, and I think all 3 of you have made that point, how do you even define status quo ante? It keeps changing.
No, that the government may be able to defend if the additional, fortifications are taken away, etc., and satellite pictures show a separation between the troops. But there'll be 3 other things. One is, what about your ongoing infrastructure upgrade? Have we given some commitment that we'll stop upgrading? Or when you start upgrading, will the Chinese apply the pressure again? I have a feeling the Chinese may pull their hammer back, but they'll keep it there to exert pressure on you, because the primary purpose is to condition India's strategic behavior. Because the Chinese want basically to be established that they are the chief hegemon of Asia, and it is a bipolar order in which it's them and US, and therefore India should not provoke them by combining with Australia and Japan and start this talk of Indo-Pacific and stopping their navy and so on and so forth. So therefore, it's a very long trek. How do you push back? This pushback will have to continue in Sri Lanka, in Myanmar, in your entire neighborhood, in the Indian Ocean. So it's a very long drawn out thing. Now, again, in Quad, how aggressive do you get? The Chinese would not want the Quad to become a military alliance. We are doing exercises. This time we called the Australians also. So essentially the 4 are doing military exercises. They would like to stop that. Therefore, they would like to keep this doubt in India's mind. They will not settle on any line. They leave the doubt so as to be able to use it as a pressure point. And then comes in, what about sanctions, trade sanctions, their applications? Those will come later. China has a long road to climb up to a peak where there is enough confidence and trust built, rebuilt, where we start rolling back some of those things, which may take many months or even a year.
So let me just give a quick last words to both the generals. General Hasnain, I'll start with you. General Malik can have the last word. Since almost all of you agree that this is a kind of blink, it's a blink in an eyeball-to-eyeball conflict. Where do you see matters going from here?
See, Barkha, I was looking at it this way, that through history, since 62, we have had incidents of this kind, or standoffs of this kind, which we have put behind us. We had Nathula in 67. We had Sundarongchu in 86, 87. We had Doklam in 2017. Similarly, we've had Ladakh this time. And it will take a tremendous amount of work on part of both the leadership of both the nations at the highest level to come back to the status quo ante that we talk about, although I do suspect it's not going to happen for a fairly long time. Because firstly, the definition of status quo ante itself is very, very nebulous at the moment. We have no idea. Nothing has been spoken about Depsang. What has happened to the Kailash Heights, we don't know. Is the deployment on the Pangong so south and the Pangong so north the only deployment which you're talking is devoid of the deployment on Kailash Heights? These are questions which will go along. But I am only in favor of one thing. We have the success of the 9 rounds of talks and the fact that there's a recognition that there's a need to de-escalate, there's a need to disengage, de-escalate and pull back. If that has been understood, I think that's a huge achievement on the part of both nations.
Okay. General Malik, last word to you. I think there's no major disagreements in this conversation between the three of you. But the fact that we are nowhere close to either status quo ante or a de-escalation means that this could be a prolonged low simmer conflict.
Barkha, yes. Firstly, I must say that I agree with KC Singh where he's talked about Chinese intention and the way they have been going about doing this thing. But here I must also mention that the response that has come from India this time in eastern Ladakh, that also should be taken into account. I have a feeling that the Chinese will now realize that if they try and attempt something more than what they have tried to do this time, they will get a fairly good answer from India. So I think that is another positive point in whatever exercise that has taken place from their side and response that has come from our side. And I have a feeling that Chinese will realize that military to military conflict, if it takes place, they will have to face good music from our side. Secondly, yes, I totally agree with you and what Ata has said. It's going to be a very long process, and we are only talking of initial steps in disengagement. We are not talking of de-escalation yet. I'm not talking of that. That is going to take a long time, as KC said, months and maybe even years. And we have to keep watching how geopolitically China takes this whole situation, whether it is the economic field or it is in political field, in the international arena, whether it is Quad or other issues. But as far as Eastern Ladakh is concerned, we have to remain alert. We have to keep watching, and every baby step that we take, it has to be taken carefully so that there is no sort of we don't give them an inch of extra bit, and we have to keep watching how the situation develops beyond this.
Well, I think that's very clearly and sagely said by all three of you. It's disengagement or de-escalation. De-escalation could take not months but years. I think that brings home the gravity of what we're dealing with in an adversary like China. But we leave it there for now. General Malik, General Hasnain, Ambassador KC Singh, pleasure learning a lot from all three of you. As always, I'm sure our audience did. Thank you so much. And it's a delicate situation, but at least some process of dialogue, I think, General Hasnain, as you were saying, has begun, but another Galwan can never happen. Leaving it there, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.